the recording thing myself usually, so it's like, what the hell? So this is going to be kind of like a little discussion type deal after I kind of go through a little intro, my background, things like that. So my name's Michael Babker. If you're one of those people that likes to be social, Babker is my handle pretty much anywhere online. Feel free to tweet me, tweet during the session, talk to me offline, whatever the case may be. Interesting little tidbit about me. After today, I'll have given a presentation at a Joomla Day, a WordCamp, and a Drupal camp. Why do I brag about this? Because I've been doing open source for quite a few years now, and I don't know too many people that can actually make this brag point. And I think it's kind of cool to be able to go out to different communities, different ecosystems, and give different types of presentations. And I wish more people would kind of jump up and do the same. So I got into open source by way of Joomla. I've been doing open source now basically this entire decade. Joomla is what got me into programming, development, PHP, open source, all that fun jazz, but it's not the only platform that I do work in. Through my company, Happy Dog Web Productions, I'm the lead developer. We do a lot of work with PHP projects in the CMS space, in the framework space, basically building the tools that are going to do the things that our clients need to do, pretty much entirely with open source software. And it's not even just PHP that we work with. Me personally, I do a fair bit of front-end work these days, so I'm kind of getting used to working with front-end frameworks like Vue. I've been helping out quite a bit with some of the mobile apps that our company's been doing for clients this year. And I do a lot of DevOps sysadmin type stuff, both for Joomla and at the company. So I do a fair bit of continuous integration, continuous deployment, work with tools in that workspace. Before I got into development, I was in the Army, nine-year Army vet, medically discharged. My job in the Army was basically network admin, system admin type stuff. This was just after I got assigned to Germany. I was on a team that was in charge of our tactical network equipment, satellite communications, network backbone architecture, radio communications, things like that. So, as you can tell, I really wasn't working in the web space. I was in IT, but not really related or anything. But I've always kind of dabbled a little bit with building out basic HTML websites, just toying around. Ironically, my associate's degree is in web design, which I couldn't design my way out of a brown paper bag to save my life, but that's another story. So I had a couple of high school friends that were trying to get a little group together, and they came to me and it's like, hey, can you help us with this website? And I just kind of steered toward Joomla simply because I'd come across it in a past Army assignment. We were using it for the intranet on our secure network as kind of a resource sharing tool before that intranet got integrated into the wider scale network on that secure platform, and we ended up moving to SharePoint. Worst decision ever, but that's another story. So I kind of found my way into Joomla, and then that was right around the time of our brand new 1.6 release. So I was playing with it, kind of seeing what I'd have to do to upgrade this stupid, simple site that I built, just out of interest. Was doing the right thing in open source and sharing my issues on the issue tracker. And a couple of people kind of took it upon themselves to nudge me, mentor me, to helping contribute some fixes for some of those stupid, simple things I was pointing out. Hey, there's a language string missing. Hey, you click this and it's not you click save and close and it's doing save without close. Something stupid like that. I forget what exactly anymore. So through that mentorship, that's actually what kind of got me going as a developer, and it was through that experience that when I got out of the Army, I made the decision to go from NetOps sysadmin to development. Still ended up as a sysadmin, but that's another story. In 2012, I was asked to join Joomla's leadership team. So I've been part of the team that's kind of been steering the software for the last 6 years. I've been a release manager for 4 of our minor feature releases since 2013. The first one being 3.2, the next one that we're doing this year, I'm also in charge of. I also stepped up in 2016. I was nominated to be part of the board of Open Source Matters, which is our legal organization, our not-for-profit organization that owns the Joomla copyright and trademarks and all that fun jazz. Some people had suggested that I'd be good for this production leadership role, and I accepted the nomination, won the vote for it, and ended up on the leadership board. Through all of this, I never really considered myself much more than a developer and somebody who, because of my Army background, was like, okay, I got a job to do, we're going to get it done. So I haven't really done any talks for the last couple of years. I kind of burned myself out on it for various reasons. So when I was doing this talk setup, I had to rewrite my speaker bio. And while I was doing that, I ended up using a phrase in it I really didn't think about at the time, but it kind of plugs into this topic very well. Open source advocate. I'd never really considered myself an advocate, an evangelist, a marketer, anything like that as it relates to Joomla, PHP, open source, whatever case may be. But through my experiences, I've kind of grown into that role, and I've kind of started to accept it. Earlier this year, I was invited to be at DrupalCon as part of the Open Web Lounge that Automatic was sponsoring. So you had myself and another of Joomla's founders. You had several WordPress people, and you had several Drupal people kind of leading this BOF-style track specifically focused on our open source ecosystem, our open source communities, not so much our specific software platform, but kind of the general concept of open web, open source software. And that kind of collaboration and discussion is really, really important. Our top 3 CMSs own 36% of the internet web space. Yes, most of that is WordPress. I don't know how it's blown up the way it has, but it has. Our top 3 CMSs own 70% of the CMS market space. So we are leaders in the open source space, in the web space, just because we have such a massive market share. We like to bicker with each other. We like to say we're competing with each other, but we're really not. In fact, if you want to say we're competing with anyone, it'd be proprietary solutions which have been growing massively over the last few years. Squarespace, Wix, Shopify, platforms like that, platforms that are closed source, vendor lock-in, etc., etc. One of the great things I like about WordPress's marketing is the message that it has. Democratized publishing. Some freedoms as it relates to building platforms and sharing that information, being able to change your world. And it's not just through the user interface. Yes, it's important for someone to be able to sit down, type up a blog post, publish their cat memes, whatever the case may be. But it's important to be able to share that information in multiple ways. REST APIs, open APIs are just as important as being able to navigate to a web page and read a news article without oh, you've been here 5 times this month, maybe you should make a commitment and subscribe. Security is a very important aspect of our platforms. If any of our platforms are compromised, that is a large portion of the web that you can get control of if you know what you're doing. And there's a lot of little nuances into getting security right. High-level things like making sure you're filtering user data, making sure you're not trusting things blindly, down to little nuances. How are you hashing passwords? How are you protecting user accounts? Joomla is doing some of these things a little bit better than the other platforms out of the box. We're using bcrypt hashing for our passwords out of the box. We support PHP 7.2's Argon 2 password hashing out of the box. We have 2-factor authentication out of the box. Yes, all of these tools are available as plugins in Drupal, in WordPress, in other CMSs, but it's that out-of-the-box experience that kind of gives a little nudge in a couple of areas to Joomla. That's not to say that we're doing everything right, but it's just one example of this is a little bit better of a direction. I know Drupal's working on getting rid of the SHA 512 stuff, but legacy code being what it is, it's never easy to get rid of. updates. All of our platforms have had to deal with major security issues over the last few years and getting big releases out in a timely manner. Drupal getting 2.3.974, I forget what the number is anymore. WordPress has had a couple of major security issues over the last few years. Joomla, we had one in our session API. We ended up pushing releases right around the Christmas holiday. Not a time you want to be doing releases, but when it's that urgent, sometimes you have to make that compromise. One of the things that WordPress is doing right for their market, for the type of users that they're targeting, is that automatic update platform, that set it and forget it type mentality. Sure, they might be missing out on new feature releases, but WordPress is taking on an added responsibility of ensuring that users are getting security fixes, at least, even if they are several releases behind the current status quo. Open source is about collaboration. It's not about competition. Yeah, we might be targeting the same types of users. We might be able to fulfill the same types of use cases, but that doesn't mean that we have to come in bickering with one another. It's almost impossible to go a couple of weeks without seeing one of these types of images floating around. The WordPress is better, Joomla is better, or even outside the CMS space. If you follow PHP in general, Symfony versus Laravel comes up about 3 times a week. And it's really a matter of personal opinion. What's going to get the job done? What's going to give the end user the best experience for what they are looking for? And what's going to be maintainable for whoever is owning it in the long run? So I like to talk about collaboration. One of the things that I noticed going through the DrupalCon tweets, someone had posted a picture of the Open Web Lounge. And the picture, the subject, or the picture at the time, it was myself, Aaron Campbell, and Michael Hess, and I forget who else it was, all sitting down having a conversation. I'm one of the past leads of Joomla's security team. Aaron and Michael are current security leads for their respective platforms. And it was just kind of one of those cool moments that I noticed, and that's what prompted the tweet. It's like, you don't very often see the collaboration across communities like this, let alone the leads for similar teams all sitting having a conversation. Granted, it wasn't security at the time, but it was just one of those things that was like, well, this is kind of cool. And speaking of security stuff, back in 2014 when there was that coordinated WordPress Drupal security release, Nason and I were talking actually at the WordCamp that I was at about that same issue, because Joomla used to have XML RPC in it. We dropped it, and so the release that security issue impacted had been out of support for a couple of years. But there was that collaboration there, and if we were still supporting it, you would have had one of those crazy, oh my God, all 3 CMSs are doing a security release at the same day, what's going on type things. But at the same time, still kind of cool when you think about it. This was basically the web lounge for most of the conference. You had people from Joomla, you had people from Drupal, you had people from WordPress. You had leaders in the respective communities. You had consumers of the works of those respective communities, all sitting down having business-related discussions, having open source-related discussions, talking about why it's important to keep the web open, why it's important to steer the web the way that we do. And that's kind of where I want to take this discussion. That's all I got for slides. I'm just going to leave my ugly mug up there for a little while. So, there's a point that I missed in one of these slides. Sustainability in open source. That was one of the constant topics at DrupalCon also. Being able to sustain our open source ecosystems, making sure that our resources are taken care of, that we have resources available to keep growing and doing what we do. And in some ways, Drupal and WordPress are a little bit better off because they've got Acquia and Automatic there. Even if people try to play the, well, it's 2 separate entities, the fact is those companies aren't going to let their open source projects die. Joomla doesn't have that same luxury. We don't have an Acquia and Automatic. So our sustainability is a little harder to, I guess, discuss or think about because we are entirely volunteer driven. We don't have paid contributors. We get a lot of donated resources that other companies might be paying for simply because we don't have that corporate infrastructure. And the same kind of these projects are safe exists in the framework space too. Symfony and Laravel. Taylor's not going to let Laravel die. And Sensio Labs is taking care of Symfony. Even if open source for some reason just died off tomorrow, those companies are going to keep that software up and running at their expense because they've built their organizations around it. So I'm going to assume everyone in here is working for a company that provides solutions based on open source, that has built a business around being an open source solution provider. Maybe not explicitly marketed as that, but you're specializing in WordPress development, you're specializing in Drupal development, you're specializing in customized development where you might be using Drupal as a framework, or you might be building with Symfony, whatever the case may be. How many of your organizations are contributing back to open source in some way also? See, that's kind of the trade-off of building with an open source tool is you can't entirely rely on take without a little bit of give back. And it doesn't have to be much. You don't have to go and sponsor events. You don't have to go and write a major feature. Silliest e-commerce platform built on Symfony. We have a couple of clients built on it. We have a couple of client sites built on that platform. And there's just a couple of usability quirks in the default admin UI. At the company, we keep bouncing ideas about how do we address these issues. It's just things that we've noticed working with our clients that others haven't because they're doing more of the decoupled API, whatever type integrations, whereas we're building more with that out-of-the-box experience already in place. So we've logged the issue, we've discussed it. If we do find time, we do find a solution, we contribute that fix back. One little patch might change a couple of lines in the UI, but it's little things here and there that kind of keeps open source going. Another thing that we kind of, well, me being the excessive contributor that I am in Joomla, was that issue of not having paid resources in the projects. As a release manager, I constantly will spend 15, 20 hours just working on a release, going through, reviewing what was merged, helping coordinating marketing efforts, helping coordinating security efforts, the release day, all the publishing things, making sure nothing hiccups along the way, whatever the case may be. And one of the cases that I made was, well, I have to give up 5 hours of time at the office because we don't have a paid role in Drupal. And I don't talk this out with my boss. I don't necessarily think he needs to be pressured into covering my time contributing to Joomla. If he wants to do it, I'm not going to stop him, but I'm not going to basically sit there and ask him to pay me to sit there and click a release button, basically. But other people might not be that lucky where they can be in a spot where they're the release manager and they can give up 4 hours of a workday because we do our releases 9 a.m. Central Time, which is the most convenient time for our biggest share of the market, the U.S. corporate space, the European space. The Asian space gets screwed over from time to time just because, time zones being what they are. But we purposely kind of target these release time frames to what's going to be best for the biggest parts of our ecosystem. So it's, it's just nuanced little details that you might not even think about, just being a casual consumer or even just a drive-by contributor in open source projects. It's just kind of like, well, there's a lot going on here. How can we help? How can we help these platforms evolve? How can we keep the web open? How do we kill off the fears of Microsoft buying out GitHub and all of a sudden the web's going to be a closed off space, blah blah.
The topic that was in this room just before this was AMP pages.
Oh, that was a fun one.
Right? That's exactly, that's why I kind of stayed, because this is really interesting, because it's like, if you wanna get ranked, right, you have this motivation to go to AMP pages, and this is a closed platform, and so I don't know if you guys talked about that at all, and you guys
we did
talked about
we
AMP
did
pages?
in 2015. We actually had a small team kind of looking at technical concerns about it, because it is basically another HTML output standard but it's not HTML output, so it's like you got to take a lot of considerations into how pages are going. And very quickly it turned into a FUD campaign where there were people very openly like, well, Google's trying to buy their way into Joomla, and Google's trying to do this, and oh, it's a Google thing, we shouldn't support it at all. In fact, any Google integrations in our code we should just flat out rip out because Google sucks. And then the attacks furthered because the marketing lead at the time is also a WordPress user, has been involved with helping organize a couple of WordCamps. She's now in Concrete 5. And her personal website at the time was WordPress, so people started attacking her pretty heavily because the marketing lead has a WordPress website. WordPress has been a big buy-in on supporting AMP. Automatic had a plugin out for AMP support pretty early in AMP's lifetime. And people were just like, she clearly doesn't support Joomla because she's a WordPress user. And it was just such a frustrating experience because, yeah, I get there's the concerns with corporate entities coming up with either closed standards like AMP, or coming in and buying a major market player like Microsoft's acquisition of GitHub.
Right.
So I get there are legit concerns, but at the same time, just the FUD campaigns that come out of it, it's just obnoxious.
Right.
Well, he even did mention, though, like, there are other ways to make your pages lean and run fast than just using AMP, too. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, like,
Oh.
he did talk about the closed source stuff of AMP, and he did talk about them wanting to, this last couple months, just like, trying to open source more of the AMP caching system or something. But, it's like, it's still a process, it's mostly Google's thing. So.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, AMP to me is still pretty heavily targeted towards a specific sector of the market. Like, I don't see the use in AMP beyond news websites. And that's kind of when I got introduced into it, and that's the way I kind of see it even a couple of years later. We've had a couple of clients kind of ask, hey, how would AMP help our rankings and everything? It's like, you're a mattress company with a blog, you don't need it. I do think the one good thing that's come out of AMP, regardless of the corporate FUD or just flat out building an AMP site, because everyone loved having the M dot whatever sites too, is it makes you refocus on your performance on mobile. And even some of the other tools that have come out in the last couple of years, some of the standards that have come out in the last couple of years, they're putting this renewed focus on, the mobile experience. Now, granted, in my opinion, some of these things are coming at the expense of the end user experience, but that's another debate for another day, possibly. I just see a lot of these things like, okay, that's good, but we're starting to build the web for machines. We're not building the web for people.
Right.
And that's kind of where I see some of these things coming out. It's like we're focusing more on the Google Lighthouse report, the Google PageSpeed report, GT metrics, those types of reports. Oh, hey, we had a 97% score. What's it matter?
I just wanted to clarify two things, though. In full disclosure, Google paid me to write the AMP module for Drupal, so I worked with them.
Yeah.
But the AMP module is all open source code, and the AMP code is open source code, and the Google cache is not the only place that you can cache your AMP code. So there aren't any levels of proprietary code that you can't work around.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that I forgot what the other thing is. The page rankings. Google doesn't, or at least they insisted to us over and over again that they don't consider AMP in their page rankings.
Oh, interesting.
They consider how fast the page loads, though.
They consider how fast the page loads, but they don't consider whether or not the site has AMP. So the way they use AMP is to store, or is as a known factor for loading particular pages in their AMP carousel. And in general, most users prefer faster loading pages and tend to click on the things that have the little lightning bolt. Now, I personally am actually not a big, I don't know if that's still on, I'm not a big fan of AMP, but a lot of those things that you mentioned are misconceptions.
Yeah, yeah. I'll go back and say that your talk is labeled web standards and how we influence them. And that's just kind of where my thinking is going. And when I see the development of AMP by Google, seems to be that, you know, in the past there was Google Reader, right? And it's like, this is great, except you can't put an ad in that RSS feed, and that's why they probably killed it. And this is their way of trying to embed themselves completely in that process. So they're creating a web standard, an open web standard, right? Open web standard that they're creating that so they have a lot of control and that they're going to be able to monetize that, right? And that they're going to be,
Not just Google though.
but not just Google, but all the players, but also they have their space that this is sustainable and meets their business model. Whereas I think the Google Reader probably didn't because they can't, right? And so, and how does that influence us as creators of the web and deliverers of the web and how we want to do that, right?
So the thing with Reader versus AMP and the whole ads thing, like,
Yeah.
whether or not you agree with having ads on websites or anything, you know, some of these websites do use that kind of money to keep things going.
Yep, absolutely.
We've got sporadic ads spread throughout Joomla.org, which is something we didn't do for the longest time, just to kind of help with that income. And if we did do an AMP type platform, you know, on those AMP pages, you would lose that ad marketing because AMP doesn't render it or anything. So I do think it's important that they be able to support that type of ad platform. And that actually kind of played into another one of these FUD campaigns about initially discussing AMP support. Was people like, well, now Google's trying to force ads on your site. And it's like, no.
Yeah, right. So,
The goal of AMP is really only speed.
right. And it doesn't sound like it's every page, it's about news sort of, right? Article, information.
Initially, that's how it was, but Google has completely changed their approach in the last couple of years. And the next version of the AMP module that my colleague is working on her own time, allows you to build a whole website in AMP.
Yeah.
And it's possible to do that But the idea of having restrictions in how people build their websites so that they load more quickly, so that they're not as full of trackers and advertising, so that there are some limitations. The clients that I've worked with that put 50 plus tracking cookies on a website have to reduce if they want to use AMP.
Right.
And they have.
Right?
That's good.
And if they can switch it to having one, that's faster. So if you desire fast websites,
Right?
then that's one way to do it. And if you're trying to solve the issue of making faster websites on your mobile device, then the AMP is, then other people would compare that to Apple News and Facebook instant articles, and both of those projects are losing traction because people prefer the open solution.
Right, right. That you have again, another standard that's kind of imposed on you, right?
And Google's have applied to make AMP part of the WC3 standard.
Right?
So I don't know how I ended up on this AMP rant, but
It's interesting. I mean, it's a corporate. It's driven by one corporation more than a lot of standards are. But they tried to make it open, and presumably that's some input. So I just to open this discussion back up again. I mean, to do things like that take a fair amount of resources and being able to stick around and do it, you do need business models somewhere. Like someone needs to be making money from Joomla in order for there to be consistent contributions, even if no one's paid directly for the contributions. There needs to be some kind of sustainable structure somewhere, and in the context of what is starting to be open source as much, the website platforms. Every registrar is the websites they're providing are a lot more token, and then of course Squarespace and Wix are all kinds of crazy stuff. I wonder if there is anyone in the Joomla community looking at doing a software as a service platform for websites.
So there are some page builder type extensions floating around there. So from that aspect, you've kind of got something going on. SiteGround used to be our sponsor for Joomla.com, kind of a WordPress.com light. That's actually moving to cloud access, and the new version of that platform is launching in the next couple of weeks. So there is that kind of high-level software as a service where the project's kind of directly benefiting from that. But we still aren't, directly, I guess, in charge of it. Like it's still a third party is providing this solution, but they've got the exclusive contract, use of brand, use of the domain, all that fun jazz.
But the Joomla, I actually just forgot the name again, but the Open Source Matters is actually does own the Joomla.com and is licensing all of that. That's a fair amount of control, actually. It's pretty good. I think that's more than the occasional failed attempts in Drupal to go in that direction have had as far as connection with the project. I didn't even think of that. I feel that it's essential for the open source projects to start going in that space, or else, it's really hard to end up in open source now, building the website for your high school alumni thing, because you're not going to do that in WordPress or Joomla or Drupal, or maybe if you've got the right friends, you might end up in a static site generator, because that's simple and interesting enough, but you're most likely going to end up on Squarespace or Wix, or if you're lucky, WordPress.com.
And that's why I don't necessarily fault Matt Mullenweg and the Gutenberg push, because it is basically pushing for WordPress to compete with those proprietary solutions. I don't necessarily agree with the forced use of it for my own personal reasons, or some of our clients who are heavy content creators, they're not building out full page solutions like you would do with a page builder. They are blog writers, and the current editing experience is just what they need. So I do think it's interesting to kind of have to balance that out. And whenever we finally do getting around to having the Gutenberg conversation with those clients, I do think it's going to be interesting, because I do believe in the case of WordPress that movement is going to cause a small market shift, just because that change in experience is such a drastic change.
It is being forced on them.
And it is basically being forced on you. Yeah, they have the opt-out plugin, but even they've said that that's not going to last forever.
Interesting.
I did not know.
There's an opt-out, and then it's like, this is going to go away.
Yeah, the wording has been automatic. Well, I don't know if it's automatic or if it's just people who happen to work at automatic, but doing it under open source and terms, whatever. But there is a plugin already on their directory to turn off the Gutenberg editor.
It's called Classic Editor,
Yeah.
and you just turn it on, but it's not going to be supported forever. However, there is a conversation in the last month of, do we enforce it, or we do make this opt-in when 5.0 drops. Like, that conversation was, it's enforced until about a month ago, and then it's like, maybe not.
See, I haven't seen that conversation yet. I finally got in on the WordPress Slack a couple weeks ago.
Oh my god, yeah. Mel Choice, we're doing a webinar series at Pantheon with like Mel Choice and David Babker and people like that. And that's like, it's not officially it's in GitHub, like in the comments is where it is. If you're not, like, it moves so friggin' fast. If you're not following the comments of Gutenberg, it's like, it's just a blur. Bridget Polly Hack is trying her best to aggregate all of this. She runs a thing called Gutenberg News. But it's still probably going to be enforced when it drops, but throw the Classic Editor on and it's great. However, one of the biggest problems we've had with it is fixed now in Gutenberg 3, and that is your classic content just shows up in a classic content editor block. And that wasn't true a month ago. Like, your old post just wouldn't show up. The title would, but the body would be gone. Now they show up in a classic editor block, which you're going to right mouse click on, say convert to blocks, and now it's all Gutenberg. It's actually a really slick use case. So it's not nearly as scary as it was a month ago. So it will still break your advanced custom fields, it will still break a bunch of stuff, but it's mostly automatic pushing it, but that team's 180 people that have contributed to Gutenberg so far, and only like 40% of those are automaticians in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But there's still a majority of people pushing it.
I don't know. I haven't followed it since day one, but I've always had the perception it is a Matt saying we're doing this, and accept it or not, we're doing it.
Yeah, benevolent dictators, man.
Yeah.
How benevolent? It's good for WordPress.org, and I'm one of the defenders that thinks yes, because the target market isn't the purple piece of the people that we build advanced custom fields and crazy use cases WordPress for. The use cases for the 168 million businesses in the world that don't have a website. Like, let's make it drag and drop easy for them, so they don't go to Squarespace, so they don't get involved in proprietary, I don't know my data anymore solutions.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, it's a necessary thing that needs to happen.
I agree. I don't fault them for building that. I don't fault them for moving towards that mentality. I just think it is gonna be problematic, and maybe short term, 12, 18 months, it kind of stagnates the market space for them a little bit and gives Concrete 5, Typo 3, Joomla, Drupal, Grav, whatever the case may be, a chance to grow, because those platforms don't have that Wix experience, basically. And for a lot of sites, you don't necessarily want that Wix experience either. So, be interesting.
I think it's a golden opportunity for Drupal, because if you have the advanced custom field use case and you've done a lot of customization there, you're basically rebuilding Drupal 6 on your own out there in WordPress. Like, just come into the fold. Like, we already figured it out 2 systems ago.
Yeah. I think it's a big difference for WordPress too, just because like traditionally they've been very kind of like backwards compatible to forever, you know. And this is the one time where they're like, oh, actually, yeah, we're going to change a big thing, and like, you know,
we're going to change the UI, but PHP 5.2 we're going to support until there's only 5 websites on the entire internet using it.
So yeah, that's where I think it's a big change for, or it's a big moment that WordPress is finally like, yeah, we're not going to support that anymore. So.
Yeah, that is a very interesting culture shift, because you know, I've sat down with a couple of sites that we've inherited as a company to go through updates and whatnot, and you know, I just blindly hit the update button and don't even think twice about it. One of our biggest WordPress clients, she has a side project built on a Drupal 7 site. I had to deal with upgrades like 9 months ago. Their developer bailed on them before Drupal getting 1. If that tells you how out of date this site was. And it was just like, I was so weary about doing that update, just because it's like, I don't work in Drupal for the most part. You know, that one site is really my only experience in Drupal as software. But it was just like so weary, and then you go to like all the upgrade guides and everything, and it's like, well, you got to delete the entire site's files and then re-download everything. It's like, whereas, you know, Joomla, Grav, WordPress, if you don't have the automatic updates, you do have the UI button. That's just like, done.
Right. Backdrop is working on, or Nate is working on automatic encrypted updates with security.
That's it. In Joomla, we're moving toward that too. Our next release is actually going to support checksum validation for core and extensions. And there's a couple open items where we're looking at, you know, proper signed packages, validation, and things like that. A lot of this is inspired by Scott A. of Paragon, however you say that, all that company name and whatnot. And you know, every time I think about that, I'm just reminded of Matt's response to it. It's like, it's not REST API, it's not Gutenberg, not really interested right now. Maybe after these focuses are done, we'll come back to it. And it's just like, dude, you have 30% of the internet, and you're not concerned about securing your update channels. Am I the only one that sees a problem here?
Nope.
That's just kind of the perception I get. It's like, okay, I get you as the benevolent dictator, you as the project manager have a set of focuses for the software, and you want to keep people focused on those focuses. Someone else did the work for you. You just have to change your workflow. Really, the first patch that I suggested for Joomla was basically, look at the WordPress patch. It changed 20 lines in the actual WordPress code. The rest of it was the Sodium Compat library. That's all we need. The rest of it is getting me, George, and Robert to change our workflow.
Yeah. That's what Nate did too. He showed me his patch yesterday. It's like 20 lines of code.
Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
The Sodium library include, it works with PHP 7 or, you know, out of the box or older versions.
Yep. Even the checksum stuff we did, it's like, I think it ended up being 150 lines of code total. And that includes language strings and the changes needed to the update server manifest so that when the site's reaching out, it pulls down the expected checksum values. It's like, these things are not a lot of work. the work is in whoever is your release manager, release coordinator, whatever is dealing with your back-end architecture, doing the updates for that.
So did you say that Joomla is doing this? Or you're working on it?
We have checksum in place. That'll be in next release.
Okay.
It's just a soft integration right now. It'll check it. I think we'll tell you checksum validation passed. We're not doing a UI notification on checksum failed or blocking it, just because it's so new and we don't really want to basically disrupt anything right now. What I want for 4.0, our major that we're working on right now, is that the checksum is enforced if we aren't at the full package signing point at that. So basically, checksum fails, you can't install the extension. Or if you're crazy enough, download the package and go through the offline installer. So we are working in that secure all the updates direction. Just baby steps versus, oh, we'll implement this when we can do it in full, and that's after we do these other 37 things.
Does that necessitate that people can't hack? I mean, can they install? Could they take that patch and hack it their own way and then install it?
They wouldn't have to. This is referring to like updating in the UI.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
So we're doing.
Which they don't care about hacks. They just want the secure code to just come in.
Right. So
Yeah.
the command line stuff that we're working on 4.0 as well, and then the UI for updating core updating extensions.
Yep.
If it's pulling a package from a third-party resource, validate it versus just blindly consuming it and hope you can trust it.
Yep.
And because our core updates rides on the same backbone as extension updates, basically any change we do for dealing with core updates, extensions automatically get the buy-in for this. And that's why we opted for the soft checksum validation, because we didn't want users to update to our 3.9 release and then all of a sudden no extension updates can be applied until every extension developer goes and updates their update server resources to put all the checksum validations in place.
Got it.
And the same will eventually come when it comes to package signing, package validation, anything like that. Like we're not yet doing like GPG signing of release packages or anything like that. But once we get all that architecture worked out, it's just a matter of changing workflow.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Non-technical.
Sure.
So you consider yourself primarily a Joomla developer, but interested in the open web, right?
These days, I call myself PHP more than Joomla.
Gotcha.
So like day work is mostly Symfony and Laravel stuff. I don't really get involved with most of the client sites, which are Joomla, WordPress, beyond, just running through keeping servers updated, running through updating sites, running through updating extensions. Open source, I'm primarily Joomla.
So then my question is, how has your experience been going to DrupalCons and now at a Drupal camp? How has that been for you?
I like it. I can't say I've had any issues. The people that I've interacted with, the talks that I've had with people that were like, well, what's a Joomla guy doing here? That doesn't belong here. It's just like, because open source is not a WordPress community, a Joomla community, a Drupal community that competes with one another, and you can only be part of one or the other. You can't be involved in all. I like to break that barrier down. I really do believe that we as open source leaders and contributors should be learning from what's going on in other ecosystems, should be consuming code written by other ecosystems to make our lives a little easier. Some of the work going into Joomla 4.0 is actually replacing our code with doctrine libraries, with Symfony libraries. You know, if there was something in WordPress that filled our needs, we would actually use it. Well, SimplePy is kind of WordPressy, but we're dropped support for that. So it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, if we're going to be building a platform that's consuming from all these other third-party ecosystems, why aren't we involved in those ecosystems also? I had a great discussion with Fabian Potencia and Nicholas Grekus of Symfony while they were in Nashville for DrupalCon also.
Right.
You know, that was just an unintended bonus. Like, we weren't there to specifically say, hey, how do we get a Joomla and Symfony conversation going? It was just right place at the right time.
It does make me wonder, being a member of the organizing committee for this camp for the past 8 years. I just came from a backdrop talk. Now I'm listening to a talk from somebody who does a lot of Joomla development. After lunch, there's a WordPress session that Steve Perch is giving. So at our camp, we're already doing a lot of these integrations. And it makes me wonder if, in a local community, that if we wouldn't be better off co-organizing events when people are getting burnt out or organizing events.
Okay, well, so my boss was the Joomla Day Minnesota organizer for a few years. And that event basically kind of died out because he got burned out organizing the event. And Joomla just doesn't have as great of a market space in the US as it does in Europe. So our Joomla events in the US don't really perform as well. We're down to like 2 or 3 events in the US. They do okay for themselves, but you can't really do like the way WordCamps and Drupal camps are, where there's one in almost every major metro area, just because we don't have the market space in the US to make that successful.
But is your thinking that we could collaborate as a PHP community,
Yes.
more specifically?
Yes.
Or, I mean, because open source would get really big, and there's a bazillion local channels.
I'm not really the type of person that should be doing this, but I would be willing to engage with the Midwest PHP folks on that type of effort, where there's more of a targeted approach towards, hey, how do we get people from Joomla to come to this conference? How do we get people from WordPress to come to this conference? Not just, oh, PHP as a whole, and when people think of a PHP conference, you start thinking of like the frameworks and things like that. PHP World, Eli White does PHP Tech, the Cruise, a couple other events. When they started the PHP World Conference in 2014, I was there in 14 and 15. I think they did a really good job kind of marketing that event specifically towards, we are aiming for everyone. We aren't aiming for just the Symfony developers or the Joomla developers or the Drupal developers. We're aiming for, if you interact with PHP in any way, shape, or form, we want you. And the first couple of years of that conference, I haven't been back since just because time and whatnot, did a really good job of having a wide array of talks from members of those ecosystems, but also how those ecosystems essentially give back to open source as a bigger thing. So I do think it's good for the event organizers to kind of outreach and see how you can get cross-community collaboration going on. At the same time, like in my case, I just signed up to do this talk of my own accord. Same with the WordCamp in a couple of months. I do think it's good for leaders in the individual communities to kind of step outside their communities and share their knowledge and experience with other communities, because we're going to deal with a lot of the same issues and concerns. And I do think that all of us can make each other's platforms and communities better by collaborating, simply because we're going to challenge each other to do better. We're going to share solutions. We're going to make everyone else better. We're pulling from a patch that Scott did for WordPress as inspiration for securing our update system in Joomla. And think you kind of hinted at it too. Drupal backdrop, whatever it is. Sorry, I'm already forgetting specific details. Kind of same way. Hey, we can do this same thing with ours with just as much effort. So imagine if it was Andy Nason, myself, and Angie Byron all in a room talking about how do we do this secured update thing.
Yeah.
That'd be a big thing for open source.
It seems like one practical way of doing that would be if the organizers of these various committees stopped organizing conferences and said, we're not going to organize this one anymore, let's all go to one. If you still want to organize, go ahead.
Well, it's still good to do the community-focused events because you are going to get a lot of those people that are like strictly in one platform. And you are going to have a lot of content that's specifically for building with working on that platform. So I don't think you necessarily need to kill off the community-targeted events, but I do think it's good to kind of expand beyond community-specific content.
I mean, in a way, though, it's sort of like it's consolidating can help. I mean, the WordPress camps are not growing more. Most of them are plateauing, or I mean, the Drupal camps are not growing anywhere. They're mostly plateauing or actually shrinking in size. And so, I do think that people who are doing Drupal are more likely to be working with some other technologies also now. Just anecdotal sense than from some years ago. So it really may make sense. Like, Drupal may be the biggest player in a lot of the places. Sometimes it might be WordPress, maybe WordPress or PageRank, but it's like, this is, the whatever, open CMS camp.
I think there have actually been maybe a couple of like sporadic events, kind of like that in the U.S. Just not very often, but
and sort of how things started. Like the first DrupalCon was at a general
CMS conference in Chicago or something.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about there.
CMS conference, I can't remember.
I know who you're talking about. The same marketing person I was talking about for Joomla was involved with that for a little bit. John Coonan was the guy that was running that event.
Yeah.
So could we revitalize our camp by having WordPress track, right?
Well, we already basically do.
DrupalCon.
We're going to have, it's a Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, PHP conference, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what Midwest PHP is.
Yeah.
That's what Midwest PHP should be. They just they're doing good targeting the framework level stuff.
Yeah.
How do you get the CMS market space to get into that event?
Right.
Yeah, they don't go exactly for that yet. Sometimes they do.
We could look at that, like especially for 2020 when there's going to be DrupalCon, like reaching out to the West PHP about there being a real Drupal track there. I don't know where timing and location, but if we're not going to do
interesting.
it,
We take our sort of organizing effort and we like, okay, we're not going to have a camp, but let's have a